Hello, world. Happy Monday. Welcome to Divine Masculine Mondays. This is a very, very, very special Monday for me because one of my best friends in the universe is here beside me. Not only on this show, but also right beside me, which is really special. Like I can touch him, I can feel him. I'm sad John Tran isn't here. John is one of the men in my life who I haven't been able to connect with physically. So I'm just, I want to just talk about the importance of that. One of the reasons, and I'll let Matt talk in a second, but to introduce it, one of the things I want to say is Matt has been one of the greatest sources of healing and inspiration and leadership in my life, and also in how I think and taking the lid off what's possible for myself in my life. And one of those people who, when I'm around, I have a pretty hard time, not shining my light. There's that saying that often it's our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. And if you're like me, there have been many of you who've shared that and are just waiting for the permission to really, really, really share and shed your light. And Matt and I are always in conversation about how to do that. And I'm really excited about it because I've just moved to the Hudson Valley, kind of followed Matt from Harlem. And we'll get into that story. But we're here in the Hudson Valley today. And without further ado, ladies, gentlemen, and everyone, however you define yourself, Matt Johnston. Hello, Matt.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be here, and it makes me feel good to be in places where you get to introduce me, and I think where we get to introduce each other. I think there's a lot of joy and respect for what we've contributed to each other's journey. So I want to say something about myself to introduce myself to this.
Please.
Community, and thank you for having me here, and thank you for leading this conversation. It's personal to me, and it ends up being a really important part of my work, which is, I think, what this conversation is going to have some quality of, that we're here getting curious about the future of work.
We gave it away a little bit in the title, but we're definitely going to talk about it.
Yeah.
And masculinity, which we're going to talk about as well.
Yeah. It hasn't happened yet, the future. There's nothing in it, which is an interesting starting point for the conversation. It really is we get to create and perhaps even hold it like we are co-evolving in this conversation and in each of the conversations we have. So that work, that future of work is what drew me to the Hudson Valley. So I want to say, what has me in this conversation is being someone who is cisgendered and is empowered in getting curious about what the future of being a man in a work world could be. Mm-hmm. And that work in the Hudson Valley has looked like entrepreneurship and starting businesses, and for, in particular, underestimated founders. Women founded, women co-founded, LGBTQ plus founded, BIPOC founded, what Arlen Hamilton, the venture investor and thought leader, calls underestimated founders. And so that work has me thinking about and talking about my own masculinity and how that shows up in work and in all kinds of ways. So I know we'll be able to get into that a bit today.
Yeah.
But, I want to say that this, having you here, like really being with you, I felt it when you said, like, being with someone, how uncommon that is. I feel really fortunate that after quite a lot of inviting and imagining that, and I guess I'm kind of curious from you, like, what had you be here? I imagine there's a pretty interesting story to start with from that. So thanks for letting me open up a bit about that. And
that's awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much. I'm really excited. And I'll tell you what had me be here, but before we get into that, I want to share a little bit. We're talking about the future of work and masculinity, and I want to talk a little bit about our past and where Matt and I connected.
Yeah.
Where and how, because it's really meaningful to me as well, and I think it's worth sharing. We met, Matt and I met at Landmark, and it was in a leadership training development program. And that's one thing that I really love about their work is their stand for development and us working on ourselves and what it means to be human and taking responsibility for that. And inside of that, you had a really cool story kind of about how we met. We have different versions.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Matt knew me before I knew him, and
I think everybody knew you before you knew them in a lot of ways.
Possibly.
I'm not unusual in that. I had an experience of seeing a band you were playing in years before that in Brooklyn. And Whale.
Which is now Samvara. We're online actually. Officially for the first time.
So I think there is some knowing of you as an artist, as someone that was creative, and I had some sense of your journey, the journey of like an extraordinary time in the public eye, and what you were in some ways one of the first people to really deal with in the way a digital world can react. And so that was all already awake for me even before I saw you play music. And then you were also one of the first people that I'd ever seen embody coach as a realm of leadership mastery, as a way a person could be in the world, to be coach, like holding another human being's promises as your own. My promises are your promises. And the way that technology, that Landmark technology, really supports giving people an opportunity to try that, and so you stepped in as a volunteer and became a coach. And so you were one of the first people in a program, training me to explore and express my own community leadership. I saw what it looked like. And I saw what it looked like for you as a man, and as a man who was calling for being a powerful partner and romantically, and I saw that in my life. And so that's, I think, where it started. It's evolved since then.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that's a pretty similar story to the one about how we met.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I like that, but I mean, your perspective is always really beautiful to hear for me. So thank you for sharing that. And I also remember Matt had like shoulder length hair. Yeah. He was into rock and roll. He knew the Dell dude, which is one of the things he was referencing, and entrepreneurship and dealing with that. And I got to share about that in this space of coaching. And one thing that I love is Matt's partner, his wife, was my first client. And one of the things when I declared myself a coach, she showed up, and we worked together. And one of the things she wanted to create was a relationship. Really got in touch with her creativity, and then really step into her power as a leader. And she did all of those things. And she is a leader of director of the Primrose Hill Waldorf School here in Rhinebeck, New York, and doing incredible things for the community and the world of children and our future leaders. And Matt really was primary in starting this co-working space, that's right in front of it, that has people coming from all over the world. And inside of the gift of relationship and coaching, we've really had this, like, what we call like the polyamory and entrepreneurship relationship, and that we've all coached each other. I've gotten to coach his wife and Matt. Matt has coached our business, mine and my wife Cassie, and also Jenny's coached Cassie, and vice versa. And I've been coached by you. And so it's really the space of, there are no masters, but we get to be great in each other's listening. And that is something that I always feel around you. And Matt and I had this little secret, like the secret that came out in our relationship, that like I used to avoid him and his phone calls sometimes, because like I can't hide from my like power and possibility in his listening, and it's sometimes like too much to be around.
Yeah. And
so I'd be like, well, if I talk to Matt, I'm gonna have to deal with myself and what's actually like what my actual potential, and I'd really rather just be depressed and crawl in a hole right now. And one time Matt shared basically the exact same thing with me, and we were like, oh great, well, could we give ourselves permission to like be depressed and want to crawl in a hole and still talk and like create possibility? So one of the things that has, to answer your previous question, that has me be in the Hudson Valley and right here is that you and Jenny have really led by example in what's possible, and for relationships, for in both romantically but also entrepreneurially, and also, if that's a new word, and also in the sense of responsibility and the future of our world, like the future of leaders, and that's
attractive to you to be a part of.
Oh
that. Yeah, it's a natural. I recognize that's certainly
that's what I was getting
so
to.
much of a part of my own, like that's my voice and my
Yeah.
work and what I have, spent a lot of my waking and sleeping moments dealing with. And I really recognize you in that conversation, like that conversation can really resonate for some people. And you said a couple things that I want to open up a bit more as we're, retelling our own stories.
Our history,
One of the ways in which I have come to understand that my voice has a distinct role is this sense that the future of work is non-monogamous. And that turns out to be quite an access for people and, for men who lead to get responsible for that, for the sense of it. And what I mean by that is that whatever your experience of the past of work is, I invite you to take the case that there is an increasing uncertainty around the assumptions we've made about what work is and why work is and how work is. And it wouldn't take that much to start wondering, okay, how do we get paid for work in the future? And how do we make contracts in the future? And gone are the days, my grandfather worked for the Bethesda Naval Hospital for, decades and decades and decades, and retired with a watch. And that life is not the life for us or for our, next generation or the generation beyond. So this conversation that is about how do we create work lives that are non-monogamous. We don't have a lot of training in that. We don't have a lot of language. We live in a mono-normative culture, and that affects us. I definitely want to
speak to that.
So, that when I think about that, I think about you and your work. And, part of what I'm here talking about is I knew you for this thing, and I knew you for this thing, and I knew you for this thing, and you have an impact here. If we just shared part of that common training of being community leader is that you get to show up and cause community wherever you are. And it's like wildflowers sometimes. And so thinking a bit differently about what work is, I think challenges quite a bit about masculine and masculinity, which I hope we open up a bit more.
Yeah, that's exactly what I want to ask you about and talk about. That was really powerful. And one thing that resonated too is I remember in that program where we met, seeing you on stage, I don't remember the exact words coming out of your mouth, but it was basically I'm not okay with the way, just going this way anymore. And I'm here to make it stand.
I had a moment. I so appreciate that kind of work where people there's a word sangha, which is in the Buddhist traditions, a community of monks in training, and there's a way in which when people, leaders, diversity is reckoning with itself and getting honest, insightfully honest about the reality of my own life and my own privilege. I had a moment at the front of the room in one of those, leadership training environments where I really got the impact of privilege as man at the front of the room with a microphone that can sort of act confident and have it be effective in a lot of ways. The privilege of that, in a simple term, was I can remember being in that space and beginning to wake up to that. And so I think what you probably heard was some of the most tender early declarations of my saying up with this I will no longer put. I got something about my own impact, and I think the impact of the way leadership has been going.
Yeah.
And I so appreciated having you and like that listening that's like you, that's really listening for people and what's possible for people. And when you're really surrounded by that and surrounded by you, I do want to emphasize that there's something extraordinary about the kind of freedom that I got, and I think men get. I identify with men who pull for this conversation in their lives because it's like around you that we get to look in some way. So I did begin looking in that course.
Thank you. Thank you. I really got that acknowledgement received.
Yeah.
And really reflected, because that's how I feel about you. So it's a great thing. And it's really symbiotic. And that's one of the things that I want to talk about, because as far as the future of work and the sustainability, and if we are going to have a planet around any longer, one of the things I've seen that men have really been trained for, and that I work with a lot of my clients on undoing, is this, like, I got this, like, I'm going to do this by myself. I'm going to do that, strong and silent and resilient. But what's not dealt with is all the pain and emotional trauma, and it really like pushes everyone else out, and it doesn't really work anymore. And it's an old way of being. It's the masculine thing. It's the way women have had to learn. People have had to learn to be in a workplace, just like push through. And one of the things I'm seeing now that we're really working on with men undoing and creating more of is that like community, that sense of creating together.
I love the language of belonging.
We have to, and that we have to give it away, that we have to ask for help. And especially, that's one thing that I really believe we cannot really do enough of, asking for help, because that's also a way to give it away. It's also a way to let other leaders step in. It's also a way to let other women and other genders and other people step in, and it's also a way to give it away, to lead. And because we are two white men of privilege sitting here, and that's something to acknowledge. And we're looking to how to create team and innovation and take the lid off what is possible for us, and really how we can create more community and connection.
Yeah.
And I believe opening our hearts, you see a lot of these huge CEOs in the world, and now they're trying to show the human side, because they realize actually connecting to your heart can be way more valuable than anything you can create.
It's an interesting conversation about value, and I so appreciate what you put here, the magic of community. I even felt your language slow down as you got to it. It's like hard to know what to say about it.
Yeah.
And those phenomena are like that, like leadership and entrepreneurship and innovation, which is where a lot of my professional work is, ethical innovation. It's a phenomenon. It's like going from nothing to something is the world of innovation. And community is that phenomenon where people get to belong. Like they actually get to belong over there where they are. The experience of belonging that I get to have. And you, in our preparation for this conversation, we're in an inquiry, you and me, around security and safety and security. And like, how can I show up such that safety and security are in the world around me, that my language engenders that for people, that over there where they are, they get to be safe, they get to be secure. And when I think about community and community leadership, I think the part of the future of work that I want to stay curious about is how might we, as the people we are, with all we've been given and how we show up, how can we share? How can we bring ourselves to the moment so that what we leave behind is thriving? Thriving for us personally and thriving out here for everybody. And I don't think we have yet. I think that when I talk about the future of work, I think I want to have more curiosity about that than I have any kind of certainty about what that's supposed to be. Except I'm declaring that what I'm interested in is showing up such that people get to thrive and that they get to be safe and secure and belong over there where they are. So how do we learn to lead? How could people learn to lead in a way that causes communities to be here? And that's one of the qualities I think you bring to your work, is that, I mean, this is a perfect example of you being someone that stimulates some conversation that hopefully shows up in the lives of people that are getting access to this. And what would they be talking about? Well, it'd be a good thing to get curious about, how is my leadership showing up? Am I sharing about my life in such a way that community... I saw a question, Jeff Warren from Calm app. That's such an interesting expression of, first the sense that something was possible for people
and
around Calm.
I don't know who Jeff Warren is, but I know the Calm app.
So I get to work with founders and founding teams, hundreds of founders and founding teams. I've had that. I've gotten to do that work as a partner in a number of very successful innovation agencies, and then for a time as an executive at Indiegogo, and as the director of innovation and startup coaching for Idea Lab New York. Idea Lab is one of the longest running technology incubators in the world. And so this conversation about how people go from nothing to something, it's a beautiful example, the Calm app, of recognizing that something was needed in the world and finding a way to sort of get out of the way, what was in the way of people stepping into mindfulness. And an interesting example of, are we leaving the world with more thriving? I think the hope is that that kind of company and that kind of product could be an example of that. So,
and thank you for saying yes, and thank you for saying mindfulness as well too. I mean, that's a big buzzword right now, but that's a great way that men can lead, is with some mindfulness and around masculinity, around other people in the workplace. And I just got an amen from my wife, so we're on the right track, hopefully. I always listen for the validation from the universe, and listening is a great way to do that. And I really, we've talked about being in each other's listening, and the what you've been creating. And so maybe you could talk a little bit more about. Here's what I do want to ask. There is, because we could talk about so much. There's, you do work with, you come across people who are, maybe to the average person listening, as really like leaders in the world. Consider that anyone and everyone listening right now is a leader in some way in your own community. So we're not separate from. But we do see, we've talked about, how toxic masculinity can show up and how to lead more responsibly for the future of work, with mindfulness. And I'm wondering, where do you see, we're not throwing anyone under the bus here, we're looking at work really, but where do you see that toxic masculinity show up? Mostly, do you see it, and do you see any solutions that you found through how we can lead more mindfully? I had an opportunity through the pandemic to work with some really brilliant thought leaders around what conversations are going to give rise to the thriving that is possible for people, and what conversations don't. And in particular, I want to acknowledge the work of Riane Eisler, who's a social scientist and historian who has written a number of books. The Chalice and the Blade really started a kind of revolution in thinking in the 1980s about the difference between a masculine-oriented culture, the blade-oriented culture, and a feminine-oriented culture, the chalice-oriented culture. And what she's really helped distinguish through her work is that we didn't always have a domination-oriented culture. We do now. And what's her name again? I want to write it down.
Riane Eisler, R-I-A-N-N-E, Eisler, E-I-S-L-E-R, Riane Eisler. And I'm actually reading now her book, The Real Wealth of Nations. She's encouraging governments to start measuring new ways of care, because her acknowledgement is that when we're in a culture, a language, when we talk about our world in terms of dominate, not dominate, dominate, not dominate, it's a whole energy of the way people perceive their lives. And this can show up, and this is really, I think, maybe to a direct answer to your question, that I am working to eliminate military metaphors, sports metaphors, and in general, the language that I was taught to use to invoke the competitive spirit. And it's one of the ways, as someone that has had gender, like the kind of swirling identity inquiry that I know a lot of people can identify with around, like, wait, where is this for me? And boys don't cry, the tough it up culture that we get taught and that we experience as young people, all of that,
real men,
all of it, like we could just sit and go
yeah.
back and forth with it. And so the access that I find quite remarkable is, it's surprising how much of business leadership and the planning for work just seems to like, and as someone who works quite a bit with women who lead, it's like endemic in women who lead, the kind of like, I'm going to buck myself up by talking to myself in a way that is, it's like, I wouldn't talk to my friends that way, but I'll talk to myself that way, because it's like intended to get, invoke the competitive spirit. And so, it's shocking realizing how much of our language and how much of our planning and how much we talk about all of these systems is just, it's everywhere. And when you remove that, not just what it can create out here for those who do not identify in that masculine way. And frankly, we don't need necessarily more of that. So it certainly can make a difference out here. But I find the unexpected part is what it makes possible for me personally. I had no sense of what I was at the source of. I was the one who was speaking it, and I was at the effect of it. And interrupting it is trickier than you might think, but is potent. Super, super potent. Does that communicate?
Yeah. And I'd like to reflect that, if I may, to unpack it a little bit. So what I'm really hearing is, all that locker room talk, the toxic masculinity we're talking about. For those of you who don't know, I was raised in the South, and it's still like, one thing I love about my friends is, they know me well and they can help call me out on stuff. Can I share the thing you said about my old Southern thing?
Yeah.
It came up the other day and I'm hearing it, so I appreciated it. And Matt shared this, I've noticed, like, you could kind of kick into this, like, old Southern sense of humor, but it has that, like, locker room talk, but it's like, buttered over with this, like, charm or Southern. I noticed I throw in a Southern accent to make it okay. And so I've just really appreciated having a man in my life to be like, I mean, it's funny, but it's not really, like, doesn't really, I don't know.
I'm so glad you receive it. And it's one of the ways I think we live in a time.
I didn't even see it. Yeah, so I just wanted to say thank you. And now I see it all the time now. I've been thinking about it.
And it's a tricky thing, this conversation space. We live in a time of, like, we're all recovering from the effects of information warfare. And I want to invoke that gently. I don't want to say that irresponsibly. I think what I'm talking about is that we are experiencing forces that were shaped by the warfighter effort as it's expressed in lots of different cultures, lots of different parts of the world. I can identify the specific things I'm talking about when I'm talking about media, but our mutual friend Michael Slaby has distinguished it as beneficial media. What does beneficial media even look like? How would we even know?
Love Michael.
And so the orientation that I want to stand in, and I want to invite you to stand in, and each of us to stand in, is what's the effect of my speaking? Is the effect of my leadership, how I'm sharing about the future, is it the source of thriving or isn't it? And moment by moment, we got to keep looking. And we don't have skills yet to be able to address, like we don't have training at saying, hey, that fact I cited in my conversation last week, it turns out I was completely wrong in that. You know, like I didn't inspect my sources in the way that I know to do. And I was like perpetuating a little bit of propaganda maybe, and I need to take that back. Who talks that way? I don't talk that way.
Yeah.
But we actually are all at the effect of some of that, frankly, algorithm-driven misinformation campaigns. Even if we just call it advertising, we call it different things. But so with all of that in the field, to be able to support a fellow in the work who, like, if I got what that, because I grew up south of the Mason-Dixon line too. Mm-hmm. And I have a sense of the way privilege has been in my family and the way we can, like, my dad would write on Christmas presents, like my mom called him Preppy and he called her bitch on Christmas presents.
Wow.
And I think it's something about a movie, maybe the movie Love Story. I'm sorry that I don't remember what it was, the source is. But it changed. Like as a child, that was one thing. But as an adult, it's like, whoa, I don't know. Like, I think if he got, it's one thing in his relationship. I'm not putting that here exactly. But I think as that gets shared, what is that really engendering out here? And I think sometimes the slip into the Southern, gee whiz, it only takes like one darling, and then it invokes a whole world that's there for people. That's got nothing to do with necessarily my own experience, but what kind of impact does it have?
Yeah.
Given who you were, at some point it becomes, inconsistent with the way you hold people and women.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully it does for all of us.
Yeah.
There's there was a episode of What Would You Do that I was on, and there's been several. I tend to get, they like to put me in the bad guy sometimes. And one was a bartender, really objectifying a girlfriend while she wasn't, or no, another bartender while she would leave and we'd pick up her phone. And then the one I specifically wanted to reference was where I was playing a customer. I think if you put in Me Too, What Would You Do? You might find it. But I actually, in full disclosure, I had a really hard time in that role that day because it's very much hidden camera, invisible theater. So no one knows they're inside of, this world except basically myself and the... Are you okay? Okay. Yes, we're okay. Except for the producers and the people in the back room, myself. So, I had to really call this waitress out until my job was basically to elicit a response from the customers. And it really took something. It was very challenging for me to use a lot of the words they were asking me to use to objectify this waitress, even though she was an actress, even though she and I had a conversation before. We were all in agreement. We're all getting paid for it. It's for the better cause. But it was really, really uncomfortable. And one of the things about it, too, was that, no one was stepping in. And that was also uncomfortable. And then eventually someone did. And they sat me down. And it was an older man. And to talk to me, just to have a conversation with me. And that was so moving because he didn't get up and be like, what the fuck is wrong with you? But he was like, could we have, I'd like to talk to you about this.
These are the stories, there's such a theme, it stands out when men do not fall prey to that instinct to shame another man into right behavior. And there's something I think I shared with you the other day. There's a moment in a Tony Robbins event, Date with Destiny. I had the opportunity to work with Tony on the business mastery conversation he leads and where does innovation work fit in that. And it was a beautiful time in my work and my life, and I really saw someone who was in a lifelong process of mastery at being aware of how his communication landed for people, and is constantly curating and shaping the way he brings himself to spaces so that people can wake up to their power, unleash the power within.
Yeah.
And he leads this part of the conversation where at one point he shows a Braveheart clip, a clip from Braveheart with Mel Gibson. And then Tony Robbins at one point in the conversation puts his hand in the air and says, freedom. And like every single man, thousands of men, they all stand up and say, freedom. I did it. I put my hand in the air and I said it. It's so instinctive the way these things are there. And so there are ways in which culturally we have hacked into that male response. We can hack into we can shame another man into behaving in some way. And what I want to invite here is like a personal sense of responsibility for what that can look like. Not inviting victimhood for like, oh, I'm at the effect of a culture, and but like, what would it look like to begin to be responsible for it now? And I think it's mitigating that instinct, or like learning to interrupt sports and military and associating work with dating and sex and relationships. These are all ways in which we kind of bring a world with us when we talk that way. And
Mad Men, think about that.
It's
show
all
a
of
lot.
it that way.
Yeah.
And so that is, those kinds of, and I thank you, by the way. I hear you talking about your work as an artist and art that has us feel stuff.
Yeah.
And that you've got to deal with yourself in order to make it available for people is, I know, part of what you do constantly is putting yourself out there in ways that are beautiful and fun and musical, but like as an actor going there.
Thank you.
So that we can see some of the way men respond, hopefully, with a deeper kind of care that doesn't take the sort of easy, instinctive path to, tap into our inner barbarian in some way.
Yeah.
There's a different path. It's a different path, but we haven't been trained for it yet, and we've got very little language around it.
Yeah. Thank you for that acknowledgement as well. And one thing that I love about What Would You Do, while they are provoking some of this in a way, or eliciting this, right? That's the hope. At the same sense, John Quinones and the whole team does a really great job of turning it into a conversation and a dialogue. And he immediately walks in with those people, and it's like cameras come in and sits down with them and talks to them. And, you got to kind of deal with yourself with the camera, and suddenly I'm on a TV show. But, everyone gives written permission to say what they've said. And it's, some people choose not to and just give their opinions, but to create the dialogue is really, really wonderful. And just to put ourselves at risk, I think it's important to go up against those edges, especially if it's for what we believe in, especially if it's for the sake of the greater goodness coming together. And you mentioned the sort of media warfare that we've been primed for in social media and algorithms to really be at and against each other and divided. We see that in a country where there's two parties, and there's these forces at risk going on in the world, and a lot of people in the healing world and the astrological world have been talking about the continued conflict we're going to see, and the continued change, and that this change is going to escalate, but that there's a way that we can still be mindful and really responsible inside of it, and how we care for each other, and creating dialogue. Just saying what's on our hearts. And
I think that's the access. It certainly sparks me, both of the times you said it just now, that sense of possibility around dialogue. It awakens me. And it is, if there were something I would be here to give away, that the sort of sonics, the vibrating vocal cord, like how will I know if it's causing what I'm here to cause. And it would be that people are in dialogue in their lives about the nature of their own leadership and their future of their own work in the world, and getting curious about that in a new way, and being in that we phenomenon of, because out here in the dialogue, I get to evolve now, right alongside you and I are co-evolving, and the grass and the tree and money and death are evolving. For humans, it's in language. It's the process of languaging our future that we're in together, this sort of intersubjective sense making that we do when we engage in dialogue. And the dialogue that you bring with you, and that I think Divine Masculine Monday is a kind of curiosity. It's not an answer to anything. It's like I get a little bit of an inoculant against the effects of the culture being here. I get just that much more space to be curious about where that, like, the forces that have shaped my sense of myself have left, in some cases, my nervous system triggerable in ways that are not connected to reality. So moment by moment, I got to do the dismantling, like taking certain things off the mantle. Things I used to say were important, and bringing, like, dismantling that and disentangling, wait, what am I reacting to here? And so that I would be such that people get to be in a dialogue is the noble work. Like, that's the highest order work, because that's all there really is. Like, I'm not this body, I'm a conversation. And I really want to be available to those who have something going on about the future of work. I think that's the kind of access that I want to be difference making around, with the work, or the sacred masculine work.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That was very clear, and I hope you're listening. If you're ready for that, that's you. And it's a great segue for us we'll need to wrap up here in a minute. But for people who are, hey, Zach, yeah, thanks for saying that. And I've always said this along the way, please share what's resonating for you, and please share this or tag someone in your life you think could benefit from it, because the algorithms are set up for warfare. And yet one reason I love this show is weekly we do this to create more love inside of the algorithms in the world and this community. So for anyone who would love to get hold of you, Matt, and would like to continue this conversation, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Yeah, LinkedIn is the way to reach me for the work, and to be available, with you. Reaching me through you is the way to do it.
Okay. So if you're interested in contacting Matt, you can contact him on LinkedIn or send me a message. Please subscribe if you're watching this. That, again, helps us and gets this message out. And the other thing that I wanted to share, I'm sure Matt and I will have future opportunities. Matt's participated in the Lion's Den, which I'd love to talk about in the future. But that's my men's group, where we do this for 10 weeks, and it's a little more centered in specific themes. But the idea is to create safe spaces of dialogue to sort of challenge those edges, and to really find some tools for nourishment and for dismantling that, those things that our nervous system still freaks out about to keep us safe, but maybe don't serve us anymore as men today. And we want to nurture, have more nurturing conversations in our lives.
I had a really positive experience of the Lion's Den, and I want to acknowledge that, in part to really extend the invitation for those who are curious about it. The having a place where men can get real about how masculinity is showing up in their real lives which is to say we got to be open-minded about what that can look like. It can show up in our relationships. And, in my lion's den, there were men who were going through a process of divorce, and there were men who were coming out about their sexual orientation, and there were men who were taking on new leadership roles and, stepping into whole new career paths. And there were men who were dealing with, breakdowns in their relationships with their children. And so to have all the different ways that being man can look, and to be in a space that's like intentionally attempting to be safe, be the source of that sense of safety. It was so unexpectedly, I enjoy bringing the language and the conversation about sacred masculine to work. But I hadn't really realized how much I needed a place to be, like to really just be. And I think probably a lot of people feel like me, like not quite aware of how impactful it is that we don't have, our culture has lost a lot of the ways in which men could be supported in their, the regenerative potential of the way they lead, and the sort of sacred masculine. So these spaces are far too rare, and I got a lot out of it. So thank you for that.
Thank you for saying that. That's really, really great feedback. And for anyone who is interested in that conversation, you can find it in my bios and my links of everything in my link tree. And I'm actually going to take you online real quick if you're watching here on online on Facebook or any of that. We're gonna go to my website here, and here you can see, if you go to bencurtis.co. I hadn't even thought of that. You click on Lion's Den, it'll take you into it, and there's some really great things about it. You can sign up at the bottom. Just scroll all the way down if you know you're ready, and send me a message. And then the last thing I want to share with you all is this workshop coming up this Wednesday. It is a full moon this Wednesday, and what that means is there's a beautiful opportunity to create that our bodies, whether you know it or not, are really massively getting charged during this time. And it's an amazing thing to take the lid off and redefine what it means to be a human in today's world, and beyond man, beyond gender. And so this workshop we're doing this Wednesday, I'm doing it with Daniel Tuttle, the provocative intuitive. It's called The Renaissance Men. And really, if you go on our website, again, the link in the bio, it says, what projections, expectations, limitations, and lies have you bought about being a man or human that never really aligned with the infinite being that you truly be? So if you would like to take the lid off what it means to be a person or a man or whatever box you felt like you have to fit in, if you're really ready to step into that, I invite you to this conversation this Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern in the full moon. It's, again, in my bio on Instagram and on my website. And Daniel's really special. So that'll be happening.